Hey, ladies and gents, and welcome to the Controlled Interest Gamecast, where we talk about video games and everything happening in the industry, episode 70. As always, I'm joined by Jordan.
Vala Margulis.
No Dom this week. Like we said last week, he's going to be gone for a couple of weeks, so it's just going to be me and Jordan talking about whatever the hell we want to talk about. So as far as what we've been playing, I didn't really have a chance again this week to play anything. My best friend since the age of 5 was in town. He's in the army, so he was back visiting, and I've just tried to spend as much time as I can talking to him and stuff like that, and hanging out. So I didn't really have enough time to play any games. Obviously watched Game of Thrones season finale. Obviously I don't want to spoil anything for people because they'll immediately tune out, but I really enjoyed the season finale, and I'm excited for the last season. Hopefully, I have a feeling it's not going to be out till 2019, unfortunately, but I really enjoyed the season finale, and I didn't play anything. I haven't watched anything outside of Game of Thrones, so pretty boring, nothing week for me. So,
Okay. Well, just my thoughts on Game of Thrones real quick. I was a little bit underwhelmed with the finale. I think it was better than the episode before that I actually had some sizable issues with, but I did think it was solid. Definitely not one of my favorite finales. Mostly just because I felt like it was extremely predictable. The big stuff that happened was all stuff that I think most of us saw coming. I know a lot of the stuff we had even talked about on this show. So I thought that that was a little bit unfortunate. Maybe they were playing their hand a little too early with some of that stuff. Or maybe we're just... we're at that point where certain things have to happen to kind of fit into the overall Game of Thrones story arc, and so we kind of know that certain things are gonna just have to fit into place eventually. Theories that have been talked about on the internet for years and years at this point. So but it was solid. I definitely don't think it needed to be an hour and a half long, but it was good. And as far as season 8 not being out until 2019, that was actually something that I was thinking about a lot with this, was that I think years into the future this is going to go down. Basically the decision they made to shorten these last 2 seasons, I think, is going to go down as a really poor decision on behalf of the showrunners, because obviously it changed the pacing. But to me, it also, because of that change of pace, there were also indirect changes that were made that they didn't necessarily intend. I think it changed the format of the show in a lot of ways and turned it into something a lot more, obviously Game of Thrones is mainstream at this point, but it was kind of more just like a regular mainstream show, which in my opinion brought the quality down. There's definitely some issues I have there. I think, when you're this far into such a big epic like Game of Thrones, I do think that you should just go ahead and finish off these last 2 seasons with 10 episodes, especially because of the fact that these last 2 episodes were extended. So it's like, well, that's basically, it was 40 extra minutes. That's nearly another episode right there, and then you just got to do one more. I understand that this is clearly a big undertaking, and the cast and crew are probably a little bit worn out at this point, but I do think it's going to go down as a pretty poor decision in history, just because I think you should have, you've come this far in the race, and I think you should just cross the finish line running as fast as you can. So do you have any rebuttals there on that, Jared?
I don't think the quality of the show has necessarily gone down. I do think
I wouldn't say it's too considerable, but I've noticed it. I think the pacing has been so jarring, the change of pace, that in my opinion has dropped the quality just a little bit. I still think it's the best show on TV as far as production and the scale of it and the just overall viewing experience.
Yeah, my biggest thing is, I think the reason it's shorter seasons is for a couple of factors, obviously. One being budget. 2 being that, for the rest of the seasons, they kind of had well, they did. They had books to go off of, right? So they had tons of stuff to
Right.
pull from. They could pick and choose. They can change things they wanted. And from what we've kind of heard is that for these last couple of seasons, when we're getting towards the end of the show and the end of the story, is that they basically got like cliff notes from George R. R. Martin about like,
Right.
these are the major milestones you need to hit. This is how the story ends. That, right?
Yeah. Right.
I think them not having the books to pull from and them kind of just having cliff notes is why there's pacing issues, is because they basically got all of the need to know things, so they're figuring out how to tie this to this to this, but they
Sure.
don't have all they, you know what I mean? I think them not having the books is the biggest factor in the show being different. I think that's the biggest factor, I guess is the easiest way to put it. Is it's glaring to see that they obviously don't have books to pull from. And I don't think obviously I still think it's a great show, but you can definitely see a lot more flaws than normal because they don't have those books to pull from. And I think the reason that this finale, I enjoyed it. I don't think it was one of the strongest finales. Season 6 finale I think was really strong. There's a lot of the seasons have really strong finales. I think this one was weaker because, in a way, the next two seasons are 7 and 8 are one season, I think, kind of in my brain, and they're kind of splitting it into two, you know.
Yeah.
And I think of this as more of like a mid-season finale. You kind of even see that because it's a major cliffhanger. Memory might serve me wrong, but has there been another cliffhanger this like dramatic at the end of a Game of Thrones season?
In some ways, I think this actually, without spoiling the ending of this season, you've seen it, so you'll know what I'm talking about, Jared. I think this really reminds me of, I think it was either 2 or 3, I know it was one of those 2, where you see the White Walkers walking.
Oh, yeah.
And it's basically just panning over their entire army, and you start seeing the generals on the horses and stuff like that. This was very reminiscent of that, and that was a cliffhanger, even though it didn't necessarily matter. You know, it wasn't like immediately something that had to be dealt with, obviously, with us still waiting for the White Walkers to be to start this war. But I do agree with what you're saying, that the biggest reason that we're having these major shifts in the show is because of them running out of book, essentially. And I still think that's also a poor decision on the side of the showrunners, because as I think I mentioned when I talked about finishing the first book and watching the first season again, they were kind of adapting them basically one for one, where season 1 is book 1, season 2 is book 2, and then it starts to get muddy from there. Season 3 is basically the first half of book 3, and then the second half of book 3 is season 4, but then they start mixing a lot of elements in season 4 especially. And so if it had been one for one, or even one for like half of a book, to where season 3 is first half of book 3, and then season 4 is only the second half of book 3, and then from there on, obviously they would be going way longer and have a lot of seasons, but I just think that it would have worked better as far as the true adaptation that it seemed like they were going for in the beginning, that it seems obviously they've got away from, since they're not even really adapting anything at this point other than the world of Game of Thrones itself.
I really wish they would have just like made it, and this sounds crummy to say because I don't want to rush writers. Like George R. R. Martin is obviously a fantastic writer, and you don't want to rush people. But like if I was HBO, I kind of would have been like, hey, we're adapting the show where you need to contractually be obligated to finishing the books in a set timeline. I don't know. That's my personal onus on it, and I don't want to rush the guy, but to some extent it's like you're kind of hurting your own world you created. And I'm not saying it's only on him. Obviously there's a lot more people involved, and it's not just his fault, but he is the man who writes the books, and the books aren't finished.
Novels are singular form of media in that sense, where like it is really the one guy, unless it's a double author deal. It really is him. It really is his deal, and it's not like a movie production where he's like, well, but the director of photography didn't show up or something. It's like, you're the one writing the book. There's editors, but you're the one writing the book. And so I actually totally agree with what you're saying. But even going into the first season, it was already known that he was taking a long time to write these books, because obviously he was even earlier in the series at that point. But I do think, that is sort of a whole other conversation we could have, but I will say that it's clear that he's had issues, one being the fact that this property has exploded in popularity has definitely affected him in his writing. I'm pretty sure he added another book onto the series that wasn't originally going to be there, because we're now waiting for 2 books as opposed to just the one final, I think is how it was originally supposed to be. Excuse me. But I do think that it probably would have been a good idea for HBO to be like, all right, we need to work out some deal where we know when the book's going to be out so that we can hit this date and you know what you're doing. He's been vocal about the fact that he's had issues writing it, that he's stopped and started, that he's thrown some stuff out. But at this point, it is kind of like, all right, dude, you need to put up or shut up, because it's time. It needs to happen. And then on the other end of that, I do think that it is kind of weird that, if the showrunners want to do less episodes, the reports were that they were kind of worn out, and that's why they made this decision. Yeah. If that's the case, I can abide by that, but I do think it is weird that they're like, yeah, we're going to have less episodes, so it's less of a burden on us and the crew, but it's also going to take us longer to do a shorter amount of episodes. Like, we're going to have to wait an extra year, seemingly, for this final season.
More than likely, yeah. We're assuming, but really it's
drive.
Like... yeah.
It's like, yeah, we've done 10 episodes every year. Now we're only going to be able to do 7, and it's going to take a year and a half for season 7 to come out. I realized that was for weather reasons, they were saying. But then for season 8, that's going to take a whole 2 years, and it's not even going to be 10 episodes. I'm like, I don't know if I really buy that totally, so...
Yeah.
Obviously, this is a deep Game of Thrones discussion we're having here, but it was the season 7 finale. I think that's big enough reason to talk about it, and I think we've done a good job of not spoiling it. So,
before you hop into what you played, I just want to say on a positive note, I'm excited for season 8, so I'm stoked.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah,
absolutely. After I remember, it's funny because going back and watching first season that I've just finished now, it's funny that I remember the promos for season 1. I remember like, oh, what's this? HBO's doing a fantasy series? This could be cool. I think I'll check this out. And then, really getting into it and then sticking through the series this whole time. I've talked about how rewarding I think this season was towards the beginning mostly, but I still think that these last couple episodes haven't been bad, and they've been better than a lot of TV series, great episodes or best episodes. So I'm totally psyched for season 8, and I do think that they're going to end it well. I don't think they're going to screw that up. So,
besides the finale, did you play anything this week?
Yeah, so what I've been playing is Uncharted Lost Legacy.
Ooh, cool.
And I've been playing it on a PS4 Pro, so that's worth noting because it is a gorgeous, gorgeous game. And, of course, Uncharted 4, which this is, the architecture of, is one of the best-looking games out there. So it's gorgeous, and then you'll be surprised, Jared, I'm quite enjoying the gameplay itself.
Wow.
I kind of wish that we had Dom on the show just for that one reason, but we could talk about that with him later on. But yeah, I'm actually enjoying the gameplay. I think because of the fact that the pacing is different, because it is a shorter, truncated version of a regular Uncharted game, right? So
yeah,
you're not, at least I haven't been thus far, been kind of almost panting out of breath waiting for that next cutscene. Like, all right, dude, let's just move on past this lackluster shooting. I also feel like the shooting has tightened up just enough from Uncharted 4, which is anybody's guess, really, because who knows how much they fiddled with that. But I do think if they were going to basically make another fully fledged Uncharted game like they did here, I feel like they would have tweaked that a little bit, and I do think it is a little bit better. And then, yeah, the puzzles, the way that they weave it into the story, and then the way that they do this open world that they've got going on, I think are all really well done, and it is showing Naughty Dog growing in a positive direction for me. So, yeah, I've got really pretty much only positive things to say about Lost Legacy. I'm really enjoying Chloe and Nadine. That dynamic is very cool. Chloe being more playful and kind of a gallivanting Indiana Jones type, and Nadine more being about the rough and tumble, all about her business sort of deal. So it is a very enjoyable game thus far.
Well, really quick, I
ahead.
think it's great too to see that, Naughty Dog can ship a game that people like, and Neil Druckmann doesn't have to be leading it. I think that's really positive too. Like, I think that kind of alleviates a lot of pressure. I think for Neil Druckmann, not to say he doesn't have a lot of pressure on him with Last of Us Part 2 and stuff, but
Right.
I think it's good for him too to see like, oh, I have a team that's confident enough in themselves and understand the quality that Naughty Dog needs to distribute, that
Right.
even if I'm not the lead, we can release something that's great. And I think that's really cool for a studio. I think that's really awesome.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And I'm, as we grow closer and closer, I am getting more excited for The Last of Us Part 2. I think um, The Last of Us is a special game, even though I do think it is overrated. I think it's great. I think the story's incredible. And obviously, the voice acting and the motion capture is the same excellent caliber, just like all of their modern games have been. PS3 and forward, I should say. So I'm getting more excited for that, and then that actually transitions into the next thing I was going to talk about, which is a movie that I watched last night called It Comes at Night.
I've been wanting to see that.
You've heard of it?
Yeah, I wanted to watch it in theaters and then it just passed me by. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So this is a really interesting movie. It stars Joel Edgerton, who, in my opinion, is a very underrated actor. I think he's everything I see him in. He's like really interesting and really brings some kind of a special sauce to the table that a lot of actors just don't seem to have. And he's no different in this. He's absolutely spectacular. So this movie is basically a post-apocalyptic drama, in my opinion, with horror elements as opposed to being a horror movie with dramatic elements. It is more of a character drama and a kind of a psychological drama, and it is something that I think was marketed as more of a horror movie, but it also feels like once you get in there, I don't know. I'm one of those people. We've had this conversation that I have stopped watching trailers and kind of just going into things that I know I'm going to at least enjoy the experience of a little more blind. And this was definitely like that, where I didn't know really anything about this movie other than the fact that it was getting high scores on Rotten Tomatoes and that Joel Edgerton was starring in it. And so I went into it with looking at the posters thinking, oh, this is a horror movie, and that's definitely the vibe it gives you. That's kind of what the title implies. And so it's definitely not your traditional horror movie where you're just constantly like they're trying to scare you. It is more like drama with horror elements. And so I think that if there's people out there that are thinking about seeing this movie, or you yourself, I think that would actually be a good thing to know, because there has been kind of an outcry of people a little upset with the way that the movie is handled. With that being said, since you're wanting to see it, I won't say too much, but I really enjoyed it. I love the movie. The horror elements, the dramatic elements. The reason that I was tying it into The Last of Us is because this felt like an awesome Last of Us movie.
Cool.
The post-apocalyptic side of it is basically just people are sick and they're I won't really go into like what happens to their bodies, but obviously they don't turn into like the mushroom heads of the Last of Us universe. But even still, if you just kind of pretend like they are almost, it feels so much like a Last of Us movie. And matter of fact, I think Joel Edgerton would be a great Joel from The Last of Us. He has that look in this movie. He's got the beard and totally has that vibe about him. Which I don't know if that'll happen or not, but either way, I think this has that same vibe of The Last of Us, of like people having to go through situations that they are having, really tough time dealing with, and shit happens the way it does because it's just fucked up and there's not much you can do about it. So I won't say anything else, just because, like I said, I don't want to not spoil it, but I don't want to even really give you too many hints about anything, because I think it is a really special experience, and I definitely recommend it highly. Other than that, I've been watching I have been going through the DC animated universe, so I'm pretty much finished up with Batman the animated series. I've finished Superman the animated series, so I'll be starting Justice League very soon. And this is some of my favorite shows of all time, man. This is like shit that I love to my core. The reason that I'm such a big Batman fan, the reason that I'm so into animation, I think in general. So yeah, these are really special shows to me, and I've been just enjoying the crap out of them, watching them as an adult, and with the knowledge that I have now, I guess. And then I also finished both The Defenders and Ozark on Netflix. Actually watched both of those in 4K, both beautiful, well shot series. Defenders was kind of what I was talking about, hoping for out of this series, was that, you know, I'm really excited to see if they can kind of corral this Marvel Netflix deal back in, rein it back in a little bit, and kind of get it moving forward again, because a lot of people were upset at Iron Fist. I liked Iron Fist, but didn't love Luke Cage or Jessica Jones, the individual series. And I think this series did a good job of bringing these heroes together. Lots of great action, decent drama, solid drama, I should say, and definitely gets me excited for the future. They get a little Punisher teaser at the end. I'm very excited for that, and of course I'm extremely excited for Daredevil Season 3, which has already been announced, and I think that is absolutely the highlight of the Marvel Netflix universe that they've got going on. So that, and then Ozark is just a really cool crime drama. It's getting compared a lot to Breaking Bad, and I think that those comparisons are totally apt, because it's about a guy who's doing money laundering, which they do a lot of in Breaking Bad. And this deals with what are my favorite parts of Breaking Bad, which is not necessarily the meth production or dealing with the cartel or anything like that. It's more like the underground, seedy parts of America that you don't usually get to see, but that are totally there and totally exist. And there's these businesses being run this way or that way. Kind of like the vacuum cleaner guy that helps people escape if they need a new identity in Breaking Bad, stuff like that. This show's all about that, and I originally thought that it was going to be more of a this middle-aged man is disillusioned with his white picket fence American lifestyle, and wants to get into something a little bit more interesting, and so he starts money laundering, and that's not what it is at all. It's totally different than that, and I was pleasantly surprised. So a lot of stuff there, but a lot of enjoyable stuff as well. A lot of really cool stuff that I've been really into. So yeah,
nice. I right now, since Game of Thrones has ended, unfortunately, I'm either looking at starting up Mad Men, and these are all not like I'm doing one and not the others, but like I'm either thinking about starting up Mad Men, watching Ozark since it's only one season, or watching Luke Cage and then Iron Fist. Because those are the two. I haven't seen those yet. I'm not just going to jump into the Defenders because I have an OCD complex about that of like I can't just jump in if I, you know what I mean?
It definitely ties in, and it's a continuity of those series.
Yeah.
Luke Cage would be first, and then Iron Fist right before Defenders. So yeah, I would say it's absolutely worth it. But I would say, I think my vote is for you to watch Ozark first. Because it is only 10 episodes. It is something very enjoyable. It's different than Breaking Bad. I think the reasons that you don't like Breaking Bad aren't present here in Ozark. Okay. And it's really well done, man. It's a really good series. So that's what I would recommend. But I think you should, check out all those series because they're all great at some point.
Okay, let's hop into the news, guys. So as of the day of recording this, Nintendo had a Nindies showcase where they show off all their independent games that are coming to the Switch. They showed off, I think, like 20-some games. I'm only going to tell you guys about the games that I thought looked... I think all of the games had something to them, but I'm just going to talk about the ones that I felt I liked the most. And obviously, the links will be in the description. You can go and look at the list and figure out what you like the most as well. So the first game I want to talk about is Floor Kids. This game's really interesting. Mm-hmm. It's from a developer called Merge. It's a rhythm-based breakdancing game. And It looks really cool. It has a hand-drawn style to it where it's a lot more organic. It has a lot of the sketch lines in it. I'm not really a rhythm game kind of guy, but I think it looks interesting enough. It looks unique enough. It does look rough, but I think that adds to its art style. It just looks like a really cool time. I think price point is going to be huge on this game. Depending on where it comes out, I think it could sell decently well because people love rhythm games, especially I think on handhelds. Rhythm games are something cool to have that's unique on a handheld system that I think feels different. I don't know. For me, playing like outside like Guitar Hero and stuff, playing like other rhythm games on a console doesn't seem fun to me. For me, rhythm games are in the arcade or they're like mobile. But that's just my weird hang up. The next game that I thought looked interesting, which I didn't think when I...
Love the name Floor Kids, by the way.
Yeah, I love it too. Next up, Golf Story from Sidebar Games. Now, obviously, everybody's golf, the new Hot Shots golf, essentially. Everybody's loving that, and it's cool and all. This Golf Story game looks very interesting. It's a role-playing game, but the primary combat in the game is playing golf. And I know it sounds odd. But basically, I'm going to read you the type of they have here. Most role-playing games are about slaying dragons or retrieving mystical crystals, but what about an RPG that lets players equip golf clubs instead of swords? In this golf RPG, yes, it's a thing. Play through a dramatic story with a diverse cast of characters to meet, golf challenges to beat, upgrades to earn, and equipment to collect. Golf Story launches exclusively on Nintendo Switch in September. This is a game that I'm going to pick up when I get my Switch next month, to be quite honest with you.
Nice.
And I'm not even a golf guy. The game, I love the aesthetic. It looks very beautiful, looks really fun. I like odd combinations of things, and an RPG where you play golf is really cool to me. Next up, one of the biggest titles that we've known for a while that's coming to the Switch, but we didn't really have a release date, a set release date, was SteamWorld Dig 2. We have a release date now, September 21st, which is my birthday. This game looks cool. A lot of people loved SteamWorld Dig. It's a game that I don't think a lot of people heard about, but when you talk to people who played the game, they absolutely loved it. It's very Oddworld to me too, personally. Like when I look at it, it has that weird aesthetic of maybe even like Nidhogg 2, that same kind of like awkward, weird, artistic style. Next up, Travis Strikes Again, No More Heroes. So this is the No More Heroes game that's coming to Switch that was teased earlier this year with the announcement in January. Suda51 was apparently working on a No More Heroes game, and they announced it. It's Suda51 with Grasshopper Manufacturer. I'm not familiar with No More Heroes. I didn't really like the trailer personally. It looked very... I don't want to say niche because that's wrong, but like... If you're a fan of No More... I think it was a very fan service-y trailer, if that makes sense. For me, not being a fan of No More Heroes, it did nothing for me. It didn't excite me for a franchise I know nothing about. I was just like, so what's going on? Very weird to me, but it seems like a lot of people are excited about it. Didn't do anything for me personally. The last two announcements were the ones that meant the most to me, which were Shovel Knight King of Cards, which is the final expansion for the first Shovel Knight. You get this for free if you already own Shovel Knight. But basically what it is it's King Knight's story, and it's his story of how he came to be the king. And they actually showed a glimpse of the king prior to him, and it's this big muscly bound dude, and it looks really interesting. Obviously each new expansion has its own mechanics for that particular character. I'm excited for this. I'm excited for this for a number of reasons. One, the mechanics they showed off in the trailer look very interesting for King Knight. Two, this is the last promised piece for the original Shovel Knight, and I'm excited to see what's going to happen after this is done. I appreciate them holding true to all of their Kickstarter backers, and they haven't phoned this in either. Like, they could have easily made 3 expansions where it's just a skin swap, right? Essentially. They've gone through and they've remade the levels, they've redone them, they've added new mechanics, they've added a whole new storylines. Like, they actually put a lot of heart into it. And for me, I don't really see them as, like, simple DLC. I see them as, I guess they're appropriately named, they're like expansions to the story, you know? They're extra episodes. Exactly. And I love that. And I'm excited to play this, but like I said, I'm also excited to see what the future holds for Yacht Club Games, because now once this releases, it's coming out in early 2018, we're gonna be good to go, and we're gonna see where they go. Is it Shovel Knight 2? Is it the same art style? Do they go up to, polygons? Like, what exactly is it? Not even gonna be Shovel Knight. Like, what's their next project? Right?
Yeah.
I'm just excited to see what happens there. And the number one announcement for me with this, it led the whole showcase, was Super Meat Boy Forever from Team Meat. I love Super Meat Boy. Very hard game. Beautiful platformer. So that game was all about a Meat Boy obviously getting Bandage Girl, and he had to fight Dr. Fetus. This one, they have a kid named Nugget, which I think is a great name, and Dr. Fetus kidnaps Nugget. And from the trailer, they didn't show it, but I'm pretty sure it seems like the story is you playing as Meat Boy and as Bandage Girl back and forth. Just because when the kid's stolen, they kind of jump up together and clap hands. So I think they're kind of like leaning towards, hey, this is going to be more with the couple and not just Meat Boy. They added a couple new mechanics. There's just like punch mechanic. There's more enemy variations.
It's a different game type, isn't it? I read that it was a endless runner platformer.
Yeah. So it's not the set stages where it's like speed running like the other ones where it's a set stage. From what they've said, the stages get harder when you beat them. They're going to be adding more stages. It seems like this is Super Meat Boy evolved. And some people, I think I've seen some comments. This was only announced this morning, but like I've already seen the internet, and their comments. Some people are like, this isn't the original Meat Boy. I wanted something more direct of a sequel. Some people are saying, this doesn't even. It looks like a Super Meat Boy game, but it doesn't. It's not going to feel like it. Which, how do you know that if you haven't played it? For me, and this is a weird analogy, I know, or at least a pairing. People are kind of having the same discussion with Taylor Swift and her new song, where it's like, doesn't sound anything like the Taylor Swift we remember, completely different. Why doesn't she just stick to what she's good at? And I'm not saying anything about whether the song is good or bad, but I think as artists and creators, it's your onus to challenge yourself and to try new things. And for Super Meat Boy Forever, I think it's them trying something familiar but different, and I'm all for it. I may not like the game, but I'm willing to take the risk, and I'm glad they did, to check out this game. And I think it's easy to make a sequel that's the same game, just more of the first game. And, being able to evolve your sequel, I think, is huge. So,
well, we talked about that last week with Biomutant and just wanting to see new things in the industry, so I'm definitely down with that as well.
Yeah, and this game will be perfect on Nintendo Switch. Going along this, really quick before I move on to the next news story, I think Nintendo Switch is in a good spot where we're talking about, like, it's not powerful enough to be able to get the third parties to come over, right? Which kind of sucks because it's kind of this middleware console. But it is powerful enough for these ports of PC games that don't really come to console or don't feel right playing on a controller. Maybe it's just more convenient to play them on the go. Your Stardew Valleys, your Owl Boys, your Hollow Knights, even Super Meat Boy to some extent. Like, those games are good on console, and I played it on Xbox, and I liked playing Super Meat Boy, but playing on a handheld I think would feel so much better. And I think that Switch, if they keep having these tentpole first-party games, have the third parties here and there, but have a rush of these critically acclaimed indies, I think that's a nice spot to fit in, where you're not having the people owning a Switch complaining, I'm not getting all these third-party games. They're like, I have all the Nintendo games I love, and I have all these badass indie games that I love too, And I think I think they're kind of figuring out that we don't have to try to pull in all these third parties. We just have to try to have a constant flow of great indie games and our pillars that we're known for. And I think that's a good place to be, because the 3DS I don't think was powerful enough for the games, obviously. And the indie games the 3DS had, in my opinion, weren't really high quality. They were kind of like one step above mobile games for the most part. Whereas the Switch is powerful enough to bring these games over, but they're not powerful enough for the third party. So I think it's this nice compromise that they found, and I'm excited for it, because once I own my Switch, whenever an indie game comes out, the first thing I'm going to think about personally is it coming to Switch? That's probably where I'm going to buy it and play it. So
I'm not in love with the fact that that's where they are, but that's the console they decided to make, and that's where they're at. We'll see if that's going to last them, and if people aren't upset with the handling of it towards the end of the life cycle. But it's not bad. I wouldn't say it's shitty or anything, and they're certainly, especially coming into this fall, I think they are building up a decent stable of indies to support those first party games. I think once Mario's out, I think it'll be a different story for the Switch. We'll have to reevaluate it then.
Yeah, but I'm just saying, like, for me, I understand where you're coming from. For me, it hits my personal needs of, like, big third party games. I want to play on my Xbox. I don't really want to play them on a Nintendo console. If I owned a PlayStation, I want to play them on the PlayStation. I mean, that being said, we don't live in a world where all these third parties are coming to the Switch, so I don't know if I would actually want you know what I mean? It's one of those things, like, I'm saying I wouldn't want them on there because I don't have them. You know what I mean?
I mean, but it seems like it is floating your boat. For me, I think even games that would be traditionally handheld, I actually like playing them on a big screen. Like I was emulating Metroid Zero Mission the other day, which is a Game Boy Advance game, on my big 4K 55-inch TV, and I was loving it because it wasn't like stretching out the pixels. It was working because everything was proportioned correctly, I guess is the best way to put it. And I was playing with an Xbox 360 controller, and obviously that's a very jacked up version of the way that originally came out, but I was loving it, and it looked great and felt great, sounded great. So just different strokes for different folks.
And to that point, I because I own Shovel Knight on 3DS and Xbox. I like the Xbox version way more. I didn't like playing Shovel Knight on a 3DS for some reason. I don't know why. It just didn't click for me. I don't really like the D-pad on the 3DS, to be completely honest with you. I just don't like it. As much shit as people get for, I think the Xbox 360 D-pad is worse than the Xbox One D-pad, obviously.
Yeah. I actually don't love either of them because it's funny because the 360 one is too soft, and then the Xbox One D-pad is too clicky. It's like too hard punching.
Yeah, I love
so
that.
So I actually
though.
I like some middle ground, like actually the 3DS or maybe the DualShock 4. So
I need firm.
This is why we have the different systems and the handhelds and that, because
everyone's different.
People like exactly. It works better that way.
Exactly, and I think that goes to the third party argument of I might not want it on a Switch, but who's to say somebody else doesn't? And it's like, the more often we have games that come out on everything and it's up to the consumer to choose where to buy it, awesome, because then they get to choose where it's more comfortable. The second news story here, we're not going to go too long, this isn't a huge thing, going off of talking about the Xbox One controller. It's official. Microsoft has confirmed that it is entirely discontinued the original Xbox One model, aka the VCR Xbox. I'm okay with this. This isn't like, some people were mad about this, which I'm like, why are you mad about? No one I didn't think it was as ugly as people talked it up to be, but the Xbox One S and the Xbox One X are way more beautiful than it. So I'm like, get rid of the ugly stepchild, just
and they don't. It would be bad for them to have 3 SKUs going at once.
Yep.
And I think this is the best way to do it. It's time. It's not like they did it a year and a half after the thing came out. So.
Exactly, and they officially confirmed this, but this has probably been in the works forever. I think once the Xbox One S was announced and started coming out, they started halting production on the original one.
I would hope so.
Yeah, I wouldn't say it was cheaper to manufacture, because just because it's smaller doesn't mean it's cheaper, because obviously the Xbox One S has the 4K Blu-ray player and stuff like that. So I'm not going to say that it's obviously cheaper to manufacture, but just the 3 SKU thing is way too confusing. We already have the confusion for people with S and X, much less the regular one, the X and the S. So, good riddance. See you later. So now I have a limited edition Xbox.
Yeah, there you go.
And the last news story here, once again, this is kind of a lead-in to a bigger story. We've wondered, Jordan and I, and Dom, where is Season 2 of Game of Thrones? It's actually listed on the Telltale website. We've been wondering, when is it coming? We just finished Season 7. Eurogamer had an interview with Telltale, and they asked him straight up, they're like, well, is Game of Thrones Season 2 coming out with The Wolf Among Us? Like, where is it?
Thank goodness for Eurogamer, because when they had all those announcements a couple weeks ago and they didn't say shit about Game of Thrones, I was like, what the fuck is going on?
No one asked about it, which is weird. I'm like, once they announced this, I would have hoped people flooded them with, where's Game of Thrones? Excuse me. They basically replied, no, not long after the conclusion of the first season, we said we would be continuing it, and we have designs on the future of Telltale's Game of Thrones, but right now that is on hold. So yeah, that sucks. It's a weird messaging because Telltale has been known to come back to a series after a prolonged amount of time, so we don't know if this is, it's on hold where it's never happening, or it's on hold, yeah, it's actually on hold. We don't know, they work hand in hand with the rights owners for all of these properties, because obviously Telltale doesn't work with any original IP. They adapt other people's IP. We don't know what exactly the timeline is of what if, they're like, hey, you can release a second season, but we want it to take place after this point, and this point isn't until, you know what I mean? I think they're in a weird
It's
spot.
muddy.
Yeah, exactly.
It's a muddy situation because... we were just talking about how muddy the situation is for the TV show where they're trying to move past the books. So I totally get where they're at. And, the fact that they did involve show characters kind of connects them to that. And it, if it's going to have like save transfer and all of that, then it can't just be like, oh, we're going to Old Valyria and it's going to be a total prequel and all this stuff. It kind of has to stick along the same timeline. So yeah, this does not bode well for that series. I'm worried about it. I have spoken on this show about how much I love that game, and the story in that game I think is really, really good. It sucks because they have this smaller house that they were focusing on that I thought it was really interesting. That it would be cool to see where they go in the future with that. And they did, say that it was happening on their official channels. So it's like, this is upsetting to say the least. It's jacked up.
I have a question for you. Was it in the credits officially that the people who voiced the characters from the show were the actual people? Like, was Tyrion in the game actually voiced by Peter Dinklage? Was it credited as that? Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I couldn't tell you about the credits themselves, but that it was them. It was Peter Dinklage and Emilia Clarke and Lena Headey.
Because one of my questions is, obviously those actors are very expensive.
Yeah.
I wonder, because this happens a lot, and I'm not saying this happened in this, but one thing that a lot of people don't know about is sometimes voice talent is hired to mimic other people. Like, they get hired because they're good at doing somebody else's voice.
Yeah, speaking of, I have mentioned that I'm watching Avengers Earth's Mightiest Heroes, and it's crazy because the guy that plays Iron Man sounds so much like Robert Downey Jr. playing Tony Stark. It's really cool how he does it.
Yeah. My thing is, I wonder if, and this is just all a weird theory that I have, and probably not true, if they did have people come in to sound like Cersei and sound like, obviously, Peter Dinklage and Lena Headey and all them, I wonder if those people might be under the voice actors guild or whatever that's on strike, and they can't do the game, so therefore if they want to have characters from the show that mimic voices, there's probably not a lot of people that do that accurately, so if they are under the guild, they can't do it. I don't know, it's just a weird theory. I think there's a lot of hang-ups to this, though. Yeah, I know, it's just
I don't think that's it. Because
spitballing.
Yeah, because this should have been out by now. This is something that came out several years ago, and they said immediately we're doing it again. Obviously, Game of Thrones is the second most popular property that they have access to. With, I would say, Walking Dead is probably more popular just because it's not on a subscription cable service. It's just on regular cable. I might be wrong about that, but that would be my assumption.
Are you talking about a TV property?
Yeah, I'm just talking about like the popularity of the franchise itself, not of the game.
Okay, because Batman's pretty huge.
Oh yeah, that's true. Batman is definitely the biggest property.
Guardians, I don't know if Guardians I would say is bigger than Game of Thrones. It's big though. Maybe.
Yeah, I misspoke there because I wasn't thinking about Batman.
No, I know that's why I said TV shows. Yeah.
Yeah, Batman is more recent, obviously, in their stable of franchises that they've got going over at Telltale. But yeah, it is. It's bigger than Borderlands, I guess is the best way to put it. It's bigger than Wolf Among Us, Yeah. And so it's like kind of crazy that they've taken this long in the first place when they said they were going to do it. It could be even, I thought like it's kind of crazy that Game of Thrones is such a high budget epic property that looks so good on HBO, and then you come to this game and there's like glitches all over the place, and like characters' faces don't look right, and the backgrounds look weird, and it just doesn't look very high fidelity at all. And that was something that I was wondering about, like, because this is connected to HBO. This is not just connected to George R.R. Martin.
Yeah.
Kind of like how Walking Dead takes place in the comic universe, not the TV show universe. So I could see HBO saying, like, yeah, we did that, but I don't really know, man. Like, you guys' games kind of look shitty, and I don't know if we want to present our giant franchise like that, especially since they are going to be moving forward with other series within the universe after the show ends. So could be that. But something's fishy here, because like I said, this is one of the biggest properties that they work with, certainly bigger than Wolf Among Us, which just got a season 2 announcement. And they're like, even this guy's comments where he just said, it's basically on hold, it was still, Steam's kind of cagey to me, to where they've announced it, but then this is the only thing that's come out from an official voice over these last several years. I think it was 2015 when the game came out. It's like, come on, man, it's fishy, and like I said, it's upsetting for someone that's I would say probably my favorite Telltale game, so
yeah, I like Telltale.
I hope they get their shit together and can do it. But
same, because like for me personally, Wolf Among Us, it was okay to me, and I'm not. There's a ton of fans out there, but like them doing a Wolf Among Us season 2 before Game of Thrones season 2, there's definitely something up.
Yeah, doesn't make sense.
Yeah. Speaking of Game of Thrones, though, there was a weird news story that ended up being a non-news story, where on Target, Bethesda's Game of Thrones was listed, and people started freaking out, and then it ended up being a hoax. Obviously, what I want to talk about, Jordan, because we just talked about. One of the issues with Telltale's Season 2 not happening might be a quality issue, but there have been 2 other Game of Thrones games that came out that weren't very high quality either, so that's a tough thing there.
Remind me, because I remember I know it was published by Atlas, I don't know who developed it, the basically RPG that was Game of Thrones. It was similar to like Skyrim style, even though it was nowhere near the quality. What was the other one besides that?
It was a strategy game.
I don't remember anything about that.
Let me pull it up real quick. Hold on. Basically what I want to talk about, and while I'm looking this up, you can start on your point of view on this. I don't want to talk about Bethesda making Game of Thrones specifically, because obviously that's just hearsay, rumor, whatever. I just want to talk about what we want out of a AAA Game of Thrones game. We haven't gotten that yet. It's a very big property. For me, I love Game of Thrones because it's a more mature Lord of the Rings, and Lord of the Rings is like one of my favorite properties ever.
And it's also pretty fucking mature in its own right, so it's funny that you're totally right that exactly. It is like, more bloody and more intense and stuff, but it is like...
Yeah, well, and also one of the big gripes that people have with Tolkien is that he's not very good at writing empowered female characters that well. And it's not that he, like... diminishes females in his stories. It's just that there isn't really a whole lot of prominent females. You know what I'm saying? And
which is obviously not the case.
Exactly. Game of Thrones.
Song of Ice and Fire.
Yeah, exactly. I'll go after you. I'm going to look up to figure out the name of this other game. Okay. I want you to start off with what you want to see out of a AAA Game of Thrones game. We don't have to really go into who's developing it. I just want to know about, like, systems, mechanics, what we want out of it, what would work, what wouldn't work.
Well... Actually, I do think a good developer for it would be Guerrilla Games, now that they've shown their promise with Horizon Zero Dawn. They still have a ways to go as far as RPGs go, but I think that's such a great start that they could transition into that, even though they're clearly going to do Horizon 2. But besides all that, I think, the interesting thing about the Song of Ice and Fire, or a Song of Ice and Fire book series, is that... it's obviously in this world that has so much lore, and that's something that I talked about when I was finished reading the book, is that, it's such a believable world that George R. Railroad Martin builds. In these books, it's just so interesting and so deep, and yet the timeline of the stuff that takes place within the book series is pretty short, relatively. And so it's kind of weird that there's so much. He talks about having like 10,000 years worth of history. He's coming out. We were kind of talking earlier about how he kind of just needs to get this next book done, and it's weird because he's announced that he's doing another lore book for the series that might come out before the next actual novel. So that's kind of somewhat frustrating. But needless to say, that just goes to show that this universe has a shit ton of lore. And so, like I said, it's weird that stuff has really only been covered within this small period, outside of a couple short stories that he's done that are prequels. And HBO is also developing the spin-off series that I mentioned earlier, so those could be prequels. But that's what I would like with this game, is something that is, because I don't think with this game, I don't think you go all the way back to like High Valyria or like the first men and the Children of the Forest, way far back to like basically the beginnings of time nearly. But I do, because the thing is there's a lot of interesting stuff that happened before, let's say, the first book, right? There's stuff that they talk about all the time throughout the book and TV series that happened right before, which is like Robert's Rebellion, right? They talk about Robert's Rebellion all the fucking time, and we've never really seen it. We've only just, heard stories of it, essentially. And so you could do something with that, but I'd even go back a little bit further, maybe to like, the Dunk and Egg timeline, somewhere around there, I should say, where this whole universe is established. It's not old Valyria. It is basically the world that we recognize. And you already have all these houses that you would recognize, the Lannisters and the Starks and the Baratheons and such. But you're not dealing with any events that would have too much consequence, at least, over the events that are currently taking place in the books. So as far as the timeline goes, that's where I'd like to see it. As far as the gameplay goes, I would really like to see another thing about this series is that magic, up until where we're at in the books and the TV show, it's really kind of like gone away a little bit. So I would like to see something involving magic. So maybe you would have to go back a little bit further, but it would be cool what you were mentioning before the show, where you're building your own house, you're creating your own character and building your own house, and you're kind of building this lineage. I think would be really cool. So obviously Game of Thrones has a lot to do with a war and these big set pieces with battles and such. So it'd be cool for it to be, a third person action RPG, third person being very important in my instance, at least.
Yeah.
Where you could do sword fighting, and then if it did have magic, then you could do spell casting. If it is during a time where dragons exist, during Aegon the Conqueror's time, that would be cool. So yeah, I guess I would like to see mostly something that takes place in a recognizable version of that universe, but also has a lot of the magic and stuff that is involved, so it wouldn't be super close to the books, because you would have to go back farther to see a time, kind of like in Star Wars, where in the original trilogy they're like, oh, what's a Jedi? And it's like, well, it wasn't that long ago that Jedi were a big thing. So I would like to see dragons and magic and such be a big thing. And obviously a third person action RPG would be my preference. So fighting in big battles, swinging a sword, that sort of thing.
So before we get into, I'll give my hopes and dreams, I want to go into the games that have been developed. There are 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 games that have been developed that are Game of Thrones games.
How many of those are mobile games?
0.
Wow.
So the first game is actually, one of them is mobile. I skipped past it for obvious reasons. First game is Blood of Dragons, which was a text-based game that came out on PC, web-based.
Yeah, because I think the first book came out in like '96, so this stuff has been around for a while.
This game was released in 2007. A text-based only.
Huh.
Yeah.
Yeah, when
Game,
you said text-based, I was like, well, that's an old PC game then.
Yeah, exactly. Second game is Game of Thrones Genesis, which is a strategy video game developed by Cyanide and Focus Home Interactive. Looks pretty garbage, to be quite honest with you. The next game is just called Game of Thrones. It was released in 2012. This is one you're talking about, the action RPG. Didn't review very well either. The next game is the mobile game called Game of Thrones Ascent. Obviously, you can take... It's probably like a Clash of Clans, some BS. It's a Facebook, Facebook, iOS, Android, all that stuff.
Wow.
The next game... Okay, they just re-released Game of Thrones, the one that came out in 2012. Oh no, that's the Telltale one. Okay, so there was only 6, because they list Game of Thrones Season 2 on here, but obviously that's, as we just talked about, it might not ever happen. The other game that's on here, this is something I didn't even know was in development, and this looks awful. Game of Thrones 7 Kingdoms is a fantasy massive multiplayer online role-playing game currently under development by Big Point and Art Plant. I looked at them. They haven't developed anything of note. Their biggest release was Battlestar Galactica Online. So don't look for this game.
Jared, you got to have if you have a big franchise, you got to have an online. You got to have that online multiplayer game, because then you get those microtransactions, and... It's just every big franchise, Marvel, and
Lord of the Rings
DC Universe
has an MMO.
Yeah, it's like everything has an MMO or a MOBA tied to it if it's a giant franchise, and that's just annoying.
So as far as Game of Thrones and what I want out of a game, I love like the idea, like you said, that I was talking about, of creating your own house, building your own lineage, creating history. I think one of the things that doesn't get talked about enough in the Game of Thrones Telltale game is that you can say whatever you want about the new characters in the story and all that stuff. I think they had a brilliant way of having the story of the Foresters tie into the main plot line and have them interact with characters from the main story in a way that affected the family that you were following but didn't wholly affect the main story and continuity. And I think that was brilliant, because they had people. They had Ramsay, they had Tyrion, they had Cersei.
Ramsay, that's another one I didn't think of. Yeah.
Exactly. They had all these main characters in the show interact with these people, so it felt like you were actually part of the real world. And I think that's the biggest hurdle for a Game of Thrones game, is that you need to be able to have it feel as though it's part of that world. You don't want it feeling like it's in a completely different universe or so far away that it doesn't necessarily mean you have to introduce those characters like you said, but you need to have callbacks or references or just things that pay homage to the things that people actually know. And if you do that well enough, then you can make it matter to people. And as far as...
With that being said, I would just say that it's cool that if that was kind of what we were talking about earlier about getting those famous actors or the bigger name actors for voice roles in season 2, if that was an issue, I think they didn't have such an impact in the first season that you necessarily need to have them in season 2, which actually you messed around a little bit over there in season 1, but I think season 2 it'd be really cool if it was only in Essos.
Yeah. I think
cool.
Yeah, I think having the establishing season have those characters and stuff definitely benefited it, and because it's now established, you don't need them as much. I agree with you on that. As far as gameplay, I probably want it to be RPG. I mean, we were talking about this before, and I really love the Lord of the Rings games. I think those games don't get enough love. I thought they were very solid licensed games. Some of my favorite games ever on PS2.
You're talking about like the movie games, the
movie
exactly. Adaptations?
Yeah, I thought those games are really good. And to me, that's partially something I want, but the more I think about it, I don't want anything like that, because for me, I don't need to replay the show. If I want to replay the show, I'll rewatch the show because it's so good. For me, I want it to either take place during the current timeline, and it involves a bunch of stuff we haven't seen, or, like you said, I would say before. It's hard to think after, because we haven't even seen the end of the... Nobody knows the way it's going to end, considering the book hasn't been written and the show hasn't ended.
It could be like universe-shattering, epic shit going down.
For me, just keep going back to it. Like, if you're going to have a game where you create your own character, I think being able to create your own sigil and being able to create your own house and doing that, I think would
choosing your words, choosing the animal that represents you, all that.
exactly. It'd be so cool, man. Even if you get like a decision of like 3 different areas to kind of have your house, like your family be built in. Is it up north? Are you alleged to the Starks? Is it kind of in the middle towards the Lannisters and Casterly Rock, or are you more towards
Your
the south and you're aligned
ancestral
with
home.
exactly like who do you align with? I think would be really cool.
Yes.
And it's the biggest thing is time. Like, you can even have this during the current timeline and have you interact with the story. And I mean, for instance, like you could interact in the battle for Highgarden. We didn't see that on the show. We don't know exactly what went on. So what if some people that are part of the Highgarden got away? What if instead of fighting from the perspective of the Lannisters and seeing how they conquered, what if you're on the opposite end of that and you're fighting and you're doing well, but you see everybody around you doing poorly, and there comes a point where you have to retreat? You know what I mean? I think there's a lot of different things that they can take into account, and I don't know which of those is the right answer. I just think the only wrong answer is for it to be a license to the T game as we expect, where you're playing as through all these events we've already seen. That's definitely the one thing I don't want. The more I think about it.
One thing that sucks about the show is that, and this is really only gotten worse since they've decided to truncate the episodes, is that they talk about so many places that you just don't really go to. Like, they just now got to Casterly Rock. They just now got to Highgarden, as far as, showing it on the show, I mean. And so that would be something that you could really do here, is, like, really dive into what Highgarden feels like and what the city there feels like and what Casterly Rock, the Casterly Rock's just like one part of it. The rest of it's something Landing. I can't remember. It's not King's Landing. It's something like that. Anyways, I think they, kind of a side note, I think they didn't do Dorne very well in the show. That seems, from everything I've heard about the books, to be a big part of the books. And they screwed a lot of that shit up, and they didn't spend nearly as much time as I wish they would have there. So it'd be really cool to see more of that. Essos you get to see because of Daenerys, but there's still parts of it that we didn't get to see, didn't even touch upon. And then there's stuff going on outside of Daenerys's influence and her storyline that would be interesting to see as well. So that would be a cool part of what this game could do, I think, is going to locations that they talk about all the time, but you don't necessarily get to see or really get a grip on and get the feeling of.
Yeah, I think this will never happen, I don't think, but I think it'd be cool too if they're like, we're going to give these couple of major studios the license to make whatever genre of game they want. This is maybe not indie, but like, I would really love like a political intrigue type of game, like a Sherlock Holmesy, like not like detective-y, or maybe even like politics based, where you're in the world of Game of Thrones and it maybe is during current event times, and you're having to like politically navigate this climate of seeing the person who's wearing the crown die and how that affects this, and having to negotiate and seeing how different families react and going through that whole stuff. For me, that sounds really interesting.
I mean,
the whole political
Game of Thrones,
system.
the universe certainly has enough of that to justify such a game.
Yeah.
So,
and I imagine a game that took place entirely in Essos, like you said, because you run into a lesser risk of having to interact with everything else. The only thing that's taking place during the current timeline is having to interact with Daenerys before she left, obviously. But there's so much there. You can have interactions with the Golden Company, which is this army that we haven't really heard of a whole lot in the show. And they're obviously coming into the fray. That would... I don't know. I just think there's a lot there. I think it'll more than likely going to have to be an RPG. I think it's just... I don't know. I think creating the house is the one thing I think I would want most.
Yes,
like my number one,
agree.
dude. Yeah.
So fucking cool.
Yeah. Just being able, like, they give you just an assortment of stuff and, like, mix and match options. But I want the customization option to be huge of, like, mix and match your sigils of what you want and stuff like that. And, oh, man, that'd be so cool. Oh.
Yeah. It'd be cool, kind of like a Massive Chalice thing.
Exactly.
Which is a strategy game from Double Fine that takes place over like many generations, and that would be cool if they incorporated something like that where you build your house, you do the sigil, you choose your words, you choose the area that you're located in, and the house that you choose to ally yourselves with, but then it kind of like fast forwards you through some generations to where your house is either built up or torn down based on the decisions that you make. That could be really cool to see that play out.
I mean, in an RPG, a lot of times we have this big thing where decisions can matter, and it'd be great if you get to come to these decisions where you can literally end a family lineage, or you are good to them and you show loyalty, and then they show loyalty to you and they come in big, or you show loyalty to them and then they cross you. Like, I think there's a lot there with RPG elements that we already know of Game of Thrones, of like, just because you think you're making the right decision doesn't mean it's actually the worst decision you ever made.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Right.
And I think that'd be really interesting. We need a AAA Game of Thrones game, man. Like, really.
Yeah, I mean, that was going to be my next thing. Is it's going to happen, you know.
Yeah.
Clearly with the books and the TV series and like Telltale adding their thing in, and then now we're going to have an HBO spinoff, and then there's also the prequel novellas that George has done, and then he's also doing the history books. Like, it's currently being solidified as a major franchise, and obviously the TV show has the biggest part to play in that equation, but it's just now coming around, I guess, over the course of time to where it's now going to be a gigantic franchise moving into the future. And so 10-20 years down the road, are you kidding me? We're going to have tons of Game of Thrones games, and some of them are going to have to be good sooner or later.
Yeah, and it's going to be interesting because I think we'll eventually, the way down the line, to get to a point where there's going to be Game of Thrones movies that take maybe the whole story we've seen and unfortunately truncate it, right? Like the way we've seen other things in the past, or maybe it is like the Harry Potter thing where it's 7 movies and each movie is a season or whatever. But I do think Game of Thrones is a series that will last the test of time. Like, I think this is in line with Lord of the Rings, and I think that it is one of the greatest fantasy pieces of literature. Yeah, like it's just so good, and it's a shame that we haven't had a AAA game yet. But like you said, it's going to happen, and my biggest thing is I want it to be great, because I think if it's good, that's fine and people enjoy it. But I just want a great Lord of the Rings video game. You know what I mean? Because we've been spoiled with great books. I haven't read them yet, but obviously they're great. We've been spoiled with a great television show. Just spoil us some more with a great video game. Just give us a little more.
You said Lord of the Rings there. I think you meant Game of Thrones.
My bad, yeah.
Yeah, just on that last part, because I was like, oh yeah, I think we deserve a good Lord of the Rings game too.
Yeah, but, we do as well, yeah.
Yeah, but I think that, the solidification is there, and what I was going to say is this RPG that we talked about that just didn't really go anywhere, that was published by Atlas, so I think that takes the place of like, okay, well, we've made a shitty Game of Thrones RPG, like, we're not going to do that again, almost kind of like how Insomniac's making their Spider-Man game at this point. It's like, all right, we've made the shitty licensed Spider-Man games, let's do it for real this time. So I think we're on that track, and
we could be entering the golden age of licensed games. That'd be cool.
We're getting there. It's taking longer than I expected, but you got to realize, that was a big old train that was just rolling down the bend, and like, even though a lot of them were shitty, I'm sure they were making money just because of the brand recognition. So it has turned around quickly in that sense, that it's really it hasn't turned from tons of shitty licensed games coming out to now of a sudden a bunch of great licensed games coming out, but it's turned from a bunch of shitty licensed games to now it's just stopped, really.
Yep.
And then I think
Marvel's like, no, we're going to do this, and I think other people are going to see that, so
we're going to be better,
really excited.
Better for it.
We're going to be closing up, but before we do, what are we going to be playing? I'm going to be playing Tacoma, so we can talk about it next week.
Yes.
I'm halfway through the, and it's not very long, I'm halfway through the Madden single-player mode long shot. Loving it. Fantastic. By far the best sports campaign narrative I've ever played, which doesn't really have anything to compete against. Yeah, fantastic though. That it's less corny than I thought it was going to be. It's made me tear up at points. It's made me laugh hysterically at points. Very good. Yeah, love it. So yeah, Tacoma, that, And nothing else of note for me. I'm not buying Destiny 2. That comes out obviously next week. I'm not buying Absolver either. So yeah, it's pretty much it for me.
Hey, It Comes at Night is out on digital now, so maybe check that out.
Hell yeah, yeah. I think I'm going to add that to my schedule this week. I'm going to try to watch that. I just want to commit to it and then not watch it. But that's definitely... That and Wonder Woman are 2 movies I'm going to try to see this week.
Also on digital. There you go. Nice.
Yep.
So, for me, I'm hoping that I'm going to have some time to hop into Everybody's Golf.
Hell yeah.
Which should be a jolly good time. And then hoping to finish up Uncharted Lost Legacy. Excuse me. Also, just a few episodes... Goodness me. Excuse me again. Just a few episodes away from finishing the new Batman Adventures, which is like basically the tail end of Batman the Animated Series. They kind of had a little continuation there at the end with a different animation style, but it's still continuity connected and all that. So I'll finish that up and then start going through Justice League. And like I said, this is, the DC animated universe is very special to me. Not just the series, but the movies too. I just watched Batman and Mr. Freeze Sub-Zero the other day, and I fucking love that movie. So really enjoying my time spent there. As I stated, I've finished in the past week Ozark and The Defenders, so done with that. I am finishing up also last few episodes of Season 1 of Outlander, and then I have actually downloaded the 4K version of Season 2, so I'm excited to watch that. And one issue that I had with Outlander Season 1 was that it does kind of draw, it is pretty slow for the most part, and they did have 16 episodes.
Ugh.
And that made it feel even longer. For Season 2 they moved it down to 13, which I think should be great, because there are great parts of that show and it is really cool, and I do really enjoy it. And yeah, Season 3 is coming out soon, so hopefully I'll be caught up before that comes out. And then, let me see. I'm just about finished with the 4th Dark Tower book, Wizard and Glass. I haven't been reading much recently, in the last week, I should say. But, I have finished book 1 of the Song of Ice and Fire series, as we've been talking about. And so I've got Clash of Kings sitting over there, book 2, waiting for me, so I'm thinking I might start that one.
Hell yeah. That's pretty much it for the show. As always, please subscribe to our YouTube channel. It helps us grow. Even if you're not going to watch the YouTube version of the podcast, please do that. Also, if you can, rate us on iTunes and follow us on iTunes. Helps us there as well. The more eyes we get on this, the more people we get listening, the better our show can become and the higher quality it can become. Also, I want to say our thoughts are with all those people affected by Hurricane Harvey. Devastating for everyone affected in Texas. In the southern United States. Unfortunate there, but it seems like there's a lot of people raising a lot of money for the efforts to help people. J.J. Watt from the Houston Texans, I think, has already raised $7 million, which is astounding. The owner of the New York Jets and the owner of the Houston Texans had both donated $1 million, which is fascinating. It's really great. Unfortunate whenever a natural disaster like that happens. The last one to this account that happened in the United States, I think, was Katrina, because the last big natural disaster in the course of in the entire world was probably the Japanese tsunami. Whenever this stuff happens, it's like, it's nature, we can't control it. This isn't a terrorist attack or something where you kind of feel as if maybe it could have been prevented. This is just something we have to deal with for living on this planet. It's awful. So yeah. So our thoughts are out to all those people affected. Next week, episode 71, it'll be Jordan and I. Dom will still be gone, but he'll be back for episode 72, and we'll catch you guys then. Bye.